Bismillahir Rahmanir Rahim. Alhamdulillah. Alhamdulillah wa kafa wa salatu wa salamu ala man la nabiyya ba'dahu amma ba'd. Respected listeners, welcome to the fourth lecture or fourth explanation of the fourth point in the Munjiyat of Imam Ghazali rahmatullah alayhi, those 10 things that save a person in the hereafter. First of all, we covered Tawbah, then we covered Khawf, then we covered Zuhud, and the fourth one is actually Sabr. Imam Ghazali rahmatullah alayhi mentions, he says that Allah Almighty in the Quran Kareem has mentioned many qualities and many benefits and gifts of those who show patience. And to be totally honest with you, as I was preparing this, I was thinking to myself, what can I explain when it comes to Sabr? Because if you want to see Sabr in its truest sense, in all the different explanations of it, as Imam Ghazali explains, Sabr on deen, Sabr of staying away from sins, Sabr in the face of a calamity and a difficulty, then look at the people of Palestine. Because what we can produce here is just words, but the actual amal and actions is what you're seeing over there. Imam Ghazali rahmatullah alayhi mentions many virtues, and he enumerates lots of virtues for those people who show patience and sabr in the context of deen. Allah Almighty says in the Quran Kareem, وَاسْبِرُوا إِنَّ اللَّهَ مَعَ الصَّابِرِينَ, that have patience. Indeed, Allah Almighty is with the patient. And then he says, أُولَٰئِكَ عَلَيْهِمْ صَلَوَاتٌ مِّن رَبِّهِمْ وَرَحْمَةٌ وَأُولَٰئِكَ الْمُهْتَدُونَ, that they are the people upon whom is blessings from their Lord, mercy, and they are the ones who are guided. And they are guided. Rahmat, the best, blessings upon them, rahmat is upon them, and also that they are guided. Allah Almighty in another place says, وَلَنَجْزِيَنَّ الَّذِينَ صَبَرُوا أَجْرَهُمْ بِأَحْسَنِ مَا كَانُوا يَعْمَلُونَ, that we shall definitely give those people who are patient their reward, the best of that which they used to do. They need their rewards, they will be given reward in the hereafter. Allah Almighty also says, وَجَعَلْنَا مِنْهُمْ أَئِمَّةً يَهْدُونَ بِأَمْرِنَا لَمَّا صَبَرُوا, and we made from amongst them leaders, يَهْدُونَ بِأَمْرِنَا, who are guided, يَهْدُونَ, who would guide with our بِأَمْرِنَا لَمَّا صَبَرُوا, بِأَمْرِنَا, that which we had commanded, they would guide, لَمَّا صَبَرُوا, when they were patient. And they would guide and show the people the right path through the patience. Allah Almighty says in another verse, إِنَّمَا يُوَفَّى الصَّابِرُونَ أَجْرَهُمْ بِغَيْرِ حِسَابٍ, that the patient people will be given their reward fully, بِغَيْرِ حِسَابٍ, without any hisab, unlimited, without any hisab. They'll be given their rewards fully. And then he says that Allah Almighty has mentioned inside the Quran Kareem, الصبر في نجف وسبعين موضعا, that he has mentioned the sabr inside the Quran Kareem close to 70 places. And likewise in the hadith, Nabi Kareem sallallahu alayhi wasallam says, as-sabru nisful iman, that patience is half of iman. In another place he says, min aqalli ma utitum al-yaqeen wa azimatu sabr, that the smallest thing that you have been given is yaqeen, faith, wa azimatu sabr, and the resolve of having patience. وَمَنْ أُعْتِيَ حَظَّهُ مِنْهُمَا, whoever is given his portion from these two things, yani yaqeen and faith, firm faith, and also resolve to be patient, لَمْ يُبَالِ بِمَا فَاتُ مِنْ قِيَامِ اللَّيْلِ وَصِيَامِ النَّهَارِ, that he's not bothered of what passes him. He won't care what passes him from the what he's unable to do from the night prayer and the siyamun nahar and the fasting of the day. If a person has sabr and he also has firm faith, then yes, we should be performing salah by the night and also performing fasting during the day. If something was to miss you, then you will still get the reward of this as well. The reward of patience and firm faith is standing in prayer at night time and also fasting during the day. In another hadith he says, as-sabru kanzun min kunuzil jannah, that the sabr is a treasure from the treasures of Jannah. And Nabi sallallahu alayhi wa sallam was once asked about iman. He said, iman is sabr, is patience. Isa alayhi salam, he once said, إِنَّكُمْ لَا تَدْرُكُونَ مَا تُحِبُّونَ إِلَّا بِصَبْرِكُمْ عَلَى مَا تَكْرَهُونَ, that you will not be able to achieve what you love except by your patience upon that which you dislike. So Imam Ghazali rahmatullah alayhi, he mentions all of these ahadith and all of these verses, and then he goes on to the next section, he explains what is sabr. He says, what is sabr? What is the significance of sabr for human beings? And this is a very important point, because we often forget, what does sabr actually mean? Sabr in the context of our deen, and Imam Ghazali, he explains this, he delves into this, and I've summarized it very quickly. First of all, he says the definition of sabr according to our Shariat is to be firm on the commands of Allah Almighty. Some people seem to think that sabr is somebody slaps you and then sabr ka, stay patient. Yeah, that does come into it. But the sabr in the context of deen, that also comes into it. But the primary mentioning of sabr, when it mentioned inside the deen, is to be firm on the commands of Allah Almighty, istiqamat. To be firm on the commands of Allah Almighty in the face of difficulties. What is the difficulty? Shaitan comes and whispers something in your ear. Or your carnal self, your desires come in between and say to you, do this just a little while. It's only for 5 minutes. But what do? You turn back and you show patience at that time. Allah Almighty's great reward for that. So that's the definition that Imam Ghazali rahmatullah alayhi gives, which our ulama understand, is to be firm on the commands of Allah Almighty and in the face of anything that's opposing and pulling us the other way. And he also says that it's specific to human beings. People might ask, how? How is sabr in this context specific to human beings? Imam Ghazali rahmatullah alayhi says there's two powers, two armies that are constantly challenging each other when it comes to every individual. One is the army of Allah Almighty, and one is the army of Shaitan. Yeah? And a person is constantly being pulled from this side to this side, this side to this side. When it comes to the army of Allah Almighty, there's an angel. The angels, they're whispering, they tell you, turn this way. Your intelligence and your akal tells you that you put your hand in the fire, your hand's going to get burnt. If you do that haram thing, your hands are going to get burnt in the hereafter. And the fire of Jahannam is even more severe. And there's also Shariat, which is also pulling you towards righteousness. And on the other side is the army of Shaitan. What is the army of Shaitan? You got Shaitan himself whispers inside your ears and he tells you this. Likewise, your carnal self comes in between. He lists them. He says, anger, hatred, the inner self, it comes out. And they're constantly working with each other, working against each other to pull the person to this side or this side. And this is specific to human beings. When a person allows the first army, the army of Allah Almighty, to control him, he follows the deen, he follows Islam and Shariat firmly, and he stays on it firmly, then he's achieved the maqam of sabr. He's patient and he has sabr. Istiqamat has come to him. But when you look at other creations, let's take the creation of animals. Animals follow their desires. They do what they want to do. There's no Sharia, there's no akal. Yeah? The akal according to our level. They don't have it. They just follow their desires. So sabr isn't something specific to animals. And when it comes to the angels are masoom. They follow the command of Allah Almighty. They don't follow their desires. There's no possibility of them committing a sin. They have no desires. So when it comes to sabr is something that he says is specific to human beings, not to anyone else. He says that when these armies attack a person, a person can use either his intelligence to think about the outcome of what's going to happen. I do that sin, then this is what's going to take place. He says a person then remains sabir, patient upon his deen, and he gives the example of a bitter medicine. And it seems sometimes we think that, waking up for Fajr, performing tahajjud, fasting is difficult. But then we don't realize what the outcome is. And he gives the example of a bitter medicine. The one who seeks his desires, and a person's sick, and you say to him, you've got to take this medicine, and he's ill. He doesn't want to have his medicine. He follows what his nafs says, because he finds the medicine to be bitter. But then if he lets his intelligence come in between and realize, and think to himself, wait a second, let me just drink that bitter medicine for a few seconds, 10 seconds, 20 seconds, it'll hasten my cure. I'll achieve cure in a quicker way. He takes the medicine and he feels better. So he said, likewise, when it comes to acting upon deen, that if you allow your nafs to get control of you, then there's no way you're going to accept and follow the deen. But if you let your akal come in between and your akal say to you, you know what, this is the outcome I'm going to get. Bliss and happiness in the hereafter forever and ever. Then if he does this, then he'll definitely accept and he'll be able to follow the deen. Imam Ghazali rahmatullah alayhi, then he mentions, he says that when it comes to sabr, there's three types of sabr, three levels of sabr. Number one is the lofty level, the highest level of sabr. And this is the situation where a person has completely eradicated his nafs from his soul. And he's completely following Shariat completely. When it comes to his nafs has been crushed to such a level full mujahada that it doesn't exist anymore. And he says that when a person reaches this level, it's described inside the Quran Kareem. Allah Almighty says, Ya ayyuhatun nafsul mutma'inna, irji'i ila rabbiki radiyatan mardiyya, fadkhuli fi ibadi wadkhuli jannati. He says that when a person reaches this level, it's mentioned inside the Quran, Allah Ta'ala calls it, the nafs mutma'inna, the carnal self, the self that's completely at ease. Irji'i ila rabbiki radiyatan mardiyya, happily and also pleased by Allah Almighty, return to your Lord. It's mentioned inside the Quran Kareem. Then he says, so this is the highest level. It's very difficult to get to. But there's also a lowest level, which is something a person should not aspire to at all. He should abstain from. That he says that on this level is that a person follows his carnal desires completely. His carnal desires are strengthened. You follow your nafs to an extent that it's completely in control of you. And he mentions this. He says this is when a person is at this low ebb in his life, his situation if he passes away will be such that Allah Almighty says in the Quran Kareem, وَلَكِنْ حَقَّ الْقَوْلُ مِنِّي لَأَمْلَأَنَّ جَهَنَّمَ مِنَ الْجَنَّةِ وَالنَّاسِ أَجْمَعِينَ. That Allah Almighty says that the speech has been established from me, that I shall definitely fill Jahannam from jinn and humans, all of them. Yani, when a person is at this level that he's completely following his nafs, then what happens is, Allah, if he passes away in that situation, then Jahannam shall be his outcome. Imam Ghazali rahmatullah alayhi says, how do you identify when a person is at this low ebb in his life? And he says there's two alamat, there's two signs of this. Number one, a person, when you say to make tawbah, he says, I want to make tawbah, but it's very difficult for me to make tawbah. I don't yearn it. Not now, later. He just keeps procrastinating. He delays it. That's one of the signs of a person who's following his nafs. The second is that he might want to make tawbah, but then he turns and says, Allah Almighty is Rahim, He's Rahman, He's Kareem. And he says that, he constantly ponders or he constantly thinks about Allah being Rahman or Rahim, but he doesn't take any active steps in order to correct himself. Imam Ghazali rahmatullah says that this person is deficient in his intellect. So this is the bottom level. But the majority of the people, inshallah, often the top level is very difficult. But there are mashayikh and ulama who have, and very many saints who have actually achieved the first level. But the middle level is something that people can aspire to. He says that this is the place where the constant battle is taking place between the nafs and shaitan. At times one wins, at times the other wins. Yeah? The person, generally, Imam Ghazali says, usually leaves the small easy sins. But when it comes to some major habits, skeletons in the cupboard, it becomes difficult. He at the same time has remorse on his deficiencies. He tries, he continues, he makes tawbah, he continues. Imam Ghazali rahmatullah alayhi says that this is the person who's involved in jihad akbar. He's involved in the greater jihad, the greater war, the war against the nafs itself. And that's where you have to understand that, at the end of the day, you see some mashayikh and you see some people very pious, mustaqim, and with istiqamat on deen. You think to yourself, I can't really aspire towards that. But there's constantly a battle taking place, and you should aspire to that and try as much as you can in order to reach there. He then moves on and he says that a person should be patient at all times in different ways. He says either a person is in two situations. This is very interesting. He says a person is usually in two situations. Either things are going very good for him. It's according to how he wants it. Everything is perfect. Or on the other side, things aren't going too good for him. So he divides a person's life into two sides. A person is doing something, things are going really good for him, or things are going really difficult. He says sabr should be done in all of these situations. He says that when sabr are good times, things are going good for you, financially, economically, work-wise, family home, friend life, social life, all of these things are good. You know, he's got the children, honor, respect, all of these things are there. He should also exercise patience. People will say, how does he exercise patience? He should exercise patience by controlling his nafs through patience. He shouldn't let his nafs become sarkash. He shouldn't let his nafs get control of him. We see people, or we know ourselves, that when people were living back in the olden days in India, and they were living hand to mouth, people were living difficult times. Food was very scarce, possibly. Humbleness was there. But as soon as their pockets fill up in this country and they start earning the money, then the nafs become sarkash. There's one life in public, but there's another life in private. There's one life in public, there's another life in private. And as money comes, then the ways to do sins and to be disobedient to Allah Almighty, all the different novel ways start appearing. And we know what this is, but what should you do? You should be patient at that time as well. Patient in controlling your nafs and turning it towards Allah Almighty. And remembering your humble self. And realize that what you have is from Allah Almighty as a gift, as an amanat which shall end at any times. Dunya has come to you, but detach yourself from dunya and be thankful to Allah Almighty. And then he says that this is what a person's situation should be when things are good for him. But what about when things are difficult for him? Things aren't going as he expects. Imam Ghazali rahmatullah alayhi says he divides this further into 4 more categories. He says sabr at this time can be then divided into 4 more categories. Number 1, he says acts of obedience. That when it comes to acts of obedience, a person, things aren't going too well, it might be going well, but there's something there, and he's got to pray namaz, and he thinks to himself, I can't be asked getting out of bed to go for namaz. I can't be asked going for salah. I don't want to spend the money to go for hajj. I don't want to give my zakat. So Imam Ghazali rahmatullah alayhi says a person's nafs is going against him. He should bring his nafs under control. And 3 things he should do. He should show patience by he should express patience at the beginning of the action by showing sincerity for Allah Almighty. During the action, he should show patience and break his nafs and control it by showing sabr and patience by completing the action according to Shariat and according to Sunnah. And at the end of the action, he should carry out sabr by hiding it, not expressing it, not boasting about it, and making sure it doesn't become polluted by insincerity. So that's the act of obedience. Then he says that when things aren't too good for you, then there's also sabr in abstinence from sins. A person has a habit of carrying out sins, then he should also refrain from sins at that time and show sabr at that time as well. 2 things. And then the third, he says that sometimes a situation is out of your control. Something is out of your control. Somebody troubles you. Somebody takes your money. Somebody swears at you or hits you. Yeah? They've caused you pain. You have the ability to respond to this person. You double his size. You can physically assault him and attack him. You have the patience. You have the ability to respond in a like way. But you withhold and you do sabr at this time. He said this is the third one. And then he explains this and he says that the Sahaba Ridwanullahi alayhim ajma'in used to say, مَا كُنَّا نَعُدُّ إِيمَانَ الرَّجُلِ إِيمَانًا إِذَا لَمْ يَصْبِرْ عَلَى الْأَذَى. That we never used to consider or count the iman of a person to be perfect iman until they did not do sabr upon a difficulty. A difficulty came, they didn't do sabr, then we wouldn't consider him to be perfect in iman. Allah Almighty says in another place in the Quran Al-Kareem, وَلَنَصْبِرَنَّ عَلَى مَا أَعْضَيْتُمُونَ وَعَلَى اللَّهِ فَلْيَتَوَكَّلِ الْمُتَوَكِّلُونَ. And then another place, وَدَعْ أَذَاهُمْ وَتَوَكَّلَ اللَّهِ. He's exhorting the prophets that leave their difficulties, do tawakkul upon Allah. Yeah, and like this, the exhortations keep coming inside the Quran Kareem, where he's explaining that have sabr at this time. So this is the third one, where situations out of your control, but you have an opportunity to reciprocate in a negative way, you do sabr at that time. He said this is also recommended. And then the fourth one he says is sabr in a situation that is out of your control and you're unable to respond or take a revenge. So there's a situation there, it's out of your control. All your money has been stolen. There's no way, you don't know who this person is. What do you do in that situation? Do you respond in a likewise, you can't respond. But do you then express yourself in a negative way, tear your clothes, say stupid things, maybe even speak blasphemously? Maybe someone is passed away, and at the time of their passing, as-sabru inda sadbatil ula, the Mashaykh say, that hadith says, that sabr is at the first opportunity, not later. And at that time you show restraint and you hold yourself. Then is that sabr. That's the fourth type of sabr that a person should do. And when he then mentions a number of sayings of the Mashaykh, he says, Ibn Abbas radiallahu ta'ala anhuma says, as-sabru fil Quran ala thalathi maqamat. That patience in the Quran Kareem is at three places. Sabrun ala ada'il fara'id. Sabr at the time of fulfilling a farz action. And for the person who does that, is 300 levels or 300 rewards or levels. وَصَبْرٌ عَلَىٰ أَنْ مَحَارِمِ اللَّهِ تَعَالَى. And patience from that which Allah Almighty has forbidden you from carrying out. So from sins. He says that for that is 600 levels. وَصَبْرٌ فِي الْمُصِيبَةِ عِنْدَ الصَّدْمَةِ الْأُولَى وَلَوْ تِسْمِيَ دَرْجَةً. And sabr at the time of a difficulty that you're faced with, at the opportune moment, at the first moment, not later on. As-sabr inda sadmatil ula, and for that is 900 levels. Nabi Karim sallallahu alayhi wasallam, he says in a hadith, Qudsi, that Allah Almighty says, إِذَا ابْتَلَيْتُ عَبْدِي بِبَلَاءٍ فَصَبَرَ فَلَمْ يَشْكُنِ إِلَىٰ عُوَادِهِ أَبْدَلْتُهُ لَحْمًا خَيْرًا مِنْ لَحْمِهِ. He says, when I test my slave with a difficulty and he does sabr, and he doesn't complain to those that come to visit him, then I shall give him flesh better than the flesh he has. He will reward him greatly. وَدَمًا خَيْرًا مِنْ دَمِي. And I shall give him blood that's better than his blood. Then he'll raise his ranks and give him even more. فَإِنْ أَبْرَأْتُهُ أَبْرَأْتُ وَلَا ذَنْبَ لَهُ. If at that time of difficulty he does sabr, then if I cure him, then I shall cure him and he'll have no sins. وَإِنْ تَوَفَّيْتُهُ فَإِلَىٰ رَحْمَتِي. And if I take away if I give him death, فَإِلَىٰ رَحْمَتِي, then towards my mercy. The very famous saying about Ahmad bin Hanbal rahmatullah alayh during his mehna, that he was asked by the ruler at that time to give a fatwa. He was asked by the ruler of the time to give a fatwa. And the fatwa was that is an academic masla which became very widespread at that time. You know, in certain eras, certain maslas become very widespread. In our day, it was, you know, when the Ramzan comes in the summer times, it generally is 15, 18 degrees, and the issue of the moon sighting. Which now, when Ramzan starts coming in the colder days, it starts dying off again. So in that time, there was an issue of the creation of the Quran. And he was asked to give a fatwa which he refused to do. And he was punished. And every day, so many hundreds of lashes he was given. One of the people came to see him in the prison, and they said to him, what is your situation? And he was completely weak by that time. And he was completely tired and ill. And the books mention of what type of difficulties he went through. And they came to see him in the prison at the time, Imam Ahmad bin Hanbal. He said, what is your situation? He says, Alhamdulillah. He says, Alhamdulillah, all praise to Allah Almighty. And he followed this to the T. He wouldn't do shikayat or complain to anyone else. So he says in the hadith that if a person was to be facing some sort of difficulty and he doesn't complain to anyone, then Allah Almighty will reward him. And if he takes him away and he cures him, then he shall cure him without any sins. And if he passes away in that situation, then to my rahmat, to my mercy he will go. In another hadith, Nabi Karim sallallahu alayhi wa sallam says, إِذَا وَجَّهْتُ إِلَىٰ عَبْدٍ مِنْ عَبِيدِ مُصِيبَةً فِي بَدْنِي أَوْ مَالِي أَوْ وَلَدِي ثُمَّ اسْتَقْبَلَ ذَلِكَ بِصَبْرٍ جَمِيلٍ. That if I turn towards my slave from my slaves, musibah, a difficulty in his body or in his wealth or in his son or child, ثم استقبل ذلك بصبر جميل, and he faces that off with great beautiful patience, استحييت منه يوم القيامة, Allah Almighty says, on the day of judgment, I shall do sharam from him. I shall be bashful and shameful when I see him on the day of judgment. And ansiba lahu mizana, I shall be bashful, I'll be too ashamed to even set up the mizan, set up the scales for him on the day of judgment. Or anshura lahu diwana, or to spread and open his book of deeds on that day. وقال صلى الله عليه وسلم انتظار الفرج بالصبر عبادة, to wait for respite with patience. A difficulty comes and a person, he waits and he does sabr and he waits for that difficulty to move away. This is worship in itself. In another hadith, Allah Almighty, He says, من إجلال الله تعالى ومعرفة حقه ألا تشكو وجهك ولا تذكر مصيبتك. That from the greatness of Allah Almighty, and to understand and recognize His haqq, is that the slave, he shouldn't complain of a difficulty he faces, and nor should he mention musibah, a difficulty he's facing. Imam Ghazali rahmatullah alayh, he then ends and he says, from this you understand that sabr indeed is a great thing. Sabr in itself isn't just, if a difficulty comes to you, whether you have a control over responding or not, to do patience at that moment is also sabr. But also sabr at times of greatness and goodness, that abstain from sin. And the greatest sabr in itself is sabr and istiqamat upon deen, fulfilling the actions of deen and abstaining from those sins that are there. May Allah Almighty give us all the tawfiq to act upon this. Inshallah, next week we'll carry on with another point, which is shukr and thankfulness to Allah, and we'll mention that on Tuesday, inshallah. Subhanallah wa bihamdihi, subhanakallahumma wa bihamdik, ashhadu an la ilaha illa anta astaghfiruka wa atubu ilayk.